Hey everyone! We know you're all so excited to find out what book we'll be covering in season 5 of Pod and Prejudice. And I am here to tell you today that we have been super sneaky and have done the big reveal in today's conversation. So you got to listen to the episode to find out. With that being said, this means that season 5 is upon us, which means now is a better time than ever to join our Patreon. You'll get access to our notes and other bonus content, and you'll be able to submit your very own study questions for. So head on over to patreon.com/pod and prejudice and check it out. And now enjoy this week's episode covering Miss Austen with our guests Sarah Rose Kearns and Prerna Ramachandra, the creators of Many Down.
This is Becca.
This is Molly.
We are here to talk about Jane Austen.
We are here specifically to talk about Miss Austen, the PBS miniseries.
So, like Jane Austen proper this time.
Yes, we're talking about Jane herself and her sister and her life.
Listeners, if you're new here, I, Becca, have been a Jane Austen fan for most of my life.
And I, Molly, am a newly minted Jane Austen fan because I do this podcast.
If you want to hear Molly read through Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, Emma, or Persuasion for the first time, you can listen to seasons 1, 2, 3, and 4 of this podcast, respectively. But that is not what we're doing here today.
No, today we are talking about Miss Austen, and we are here joined today by Sarah Rose Kearns and Prerna Ramachandra, the creators of the upcoming Many Down. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks so much for being here. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about yourselves and your recent project, Many Down?
Sure. Would you like to start, Prerna?
Sure. I'm Prerna Ramachandra. I'm a filmmaker, writer, director based in New York, and I am working on a short film about Jane Austen with my friend Rose. And it's specifically about the one night that Jane was engaged before she, spoiler alert, decided to wake up the next morning and said, "No, thanks. I kind of don't want to do this anymore," and
Upon
broke off the
reflection.
engagement. Upon reflection for a whole night, broke off the engagement kind of scandalously and decided to dedicate her life to writing.
Yeah, that's right. My name is Sarah Rose Kearns. I go by my middle name, Rose, and I live here in New York City, as does Prerna. And I'm a playwright and the current co-coordinator for the Jasna New York Metropolitan Region and the artistic director of the Holy Theater, which is a 501c3 nonprofit arts organization with a mission to make plays and other gatherings that leave people feeling nourished, connected, and more able to be brave. So I wrote the play upon which Prerna's film is based a few years ago, and I was really thrilled when she came to me and asked if she could adapt it.
Oh, that's so cool. I didn't realize that it was based on a play, and that makes a lot of sense now, knowing that you are a filmmaker playwright duo. All of that sounds so cool, and like I'm so glad that you two came together and are making this piece.
I also am really psyched because Jane Austen, as we've gotten to do this podcast, we've spent a lot of time learning about Jane Austen as a character herself. And one of the things we've learned is how little is confirmed about Jane Austen in her life.
Indeed.
Yeah. So I love, we'll get into it, obviously, but I love being an Austen enough fan to imagine who she was and take the details of her life we do know and fill in the gaps.
Yeah, and that is something that I have, the challenge I gave myself for both of my Jane Austen bioplays. Many Down was the first one, and I've just completed a full-length sort of sequel that's set in 1810 called The Austens. The challenge I gave myself was to only invent in the gaps in the record and not, to the best of my ability at least, I may have made mistakes, but to not change the known history that we have and to really try to piece together the data into a coherent story.
I was going to say, we're really clear that our film is not a documentary because we just don't know enough about her in order to make it into one. But we have tried our very best to be as faithful to what we know of her life as possible, based on both the historical record, but also what we can potentially extrapolate about her life from her books.
Mhm.
Because that, I do believe, is in and of itself a record of who she was and how she thought and felt.
I love that.
Yeah. Rose, I'm really curious what inspired you to write the play in the first place.
Mm. Well, it was an idea that I was mulling on for a bit before I put together the first draft. But it's such a tiny pivotal moment. Like, we do really know that this incident happened, at least, assuming that the family anecdotes and various other bits of information that have been pieced together that were recorded by Jane Austen's nieces and nephews are accurate. She really did receive a proposal. She really was staying with her sister and her friends, the big sisters, at Manydown Park. And she really did change her mind the next day. And what I didn't realize until I started writing the piece, and I'd read Austen biographies before, but I hadn't pieced this together. She sold Susan, the book we know as Northanger Abbey, to a publisher just a few months after this. We don't know exactly when, but the Mrs. Ashton Dennis letter says that it was 8 years before the spring of 1809 when that letter was written. So that would have put it in the spring of 1803. And I started to imagine this pivotal moment where she's also about to turn 27, which is the threshold of spinsterhood, at least in her books, if not in real life always.
No money, no prospect.
Yeah, that's right. And that she had the sort of last ditch opportunity to marry and decided to not do that and instead to shop around her manuscript and try to get it published.
Cool. And how long ago, Prerna, did you like come across the play, and how did you decide that that was something you wanted to make into a movie?
I had the privilege of helping Rose assistant direct a staged reading of this play for a fundraising gala that she did for her theater group. And I fell in love with the story. I've been a Jane Austen fan since I was a child. I was 11 when I read my first Austen. I've always loved her books very much. But her journey as an artist is something that I've encountered much more recently, partly because there's not a lot of information out there. And this story fascinated me because it brought together a lot of what we already know about Austen's life and the time she lived in, which is the choices that women have to make in terms of marrying for financial stability and security, the economic prospects of marriage in Jane Austen, as you all like to say.
Graham, the sound effect.
But also, I think it feels incredibly relevant to the work that artists have to do today and the choices they have to make, which is, do we do something practical, quote unquote, in order to have financial stability and security, or do we follow our heart and follow our passion and risk financial insecurity for potentially the rest of our lives? And that was really the choice that Jane was making over here, which was marrying for money or deciding not to marry and dedicating her life to her true love, which was writing, quote unquote, true love. And so I kept noodling on the story for several years, and then I have made about 5 short films. They've been screened at a lot of different film festivals. It really made sense for me to return to Austen. I've also been working on a novel, which is a modern adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. And as a result of
Ooh.
that, have encountered the complexities of the publishing industry and how terrible it can be to authors themselves. And that too resonated with me when I thought about Jane's story. And so I felt like it was finally time for me to visit her life in the form of of a film, which is my preferred art form. And I asked Rose, and she very kindly agreed to let me make this movie and executive produce it with me.
That's so exciting.
Which is perfect because I can take this segue into talking about more fully your guys' relationship to Jane Austen. Now, obviously, you guys have already spoken a bit about your love of Jane Austen and the work you're doing with her life, but we have a system here and it works well. So, we're going to ask you a couple questions about your relationship to Jane Austen, starting with what is your relationship to Jane Austen?
I can start since I alluded to this earlier. I read my first Austen novel when I was 11. It was Pride and Prejudice, and I was introduced to it by my mom, who studied English in college. And my mom was, one of the first people in our family to be educated. She grew up in a very small town in India, and also loved Austen. So it's a way in which we also bonded with each other. But I fell in love with Pride and Prejudice. I think it's a perfect Austen novel to start with. I personally believe, and it's also the perfect Austen novel for someone who's very young to read. I grew up in a fairly conservative and traditional society in India. There's a lot of pressure to get married, even at a younger age. It's something that you constantly hear, especially as a woman. And so the society that she paints in Pride and Prejudice was so relatable for me, and sadly, it was so relatable for my mom too. And having a character like Lizzie Bennet, who I could really connect with, especially at that age, but at any age, really spoke to me. And I became obsessed with her with that novel. I read it. I still read it like multiple times. It's probably my favorite Austen novel, mostly for nostalgia reasons. And it set me off on like a lifelong journey of just reading all of her books. And I think what has been fascinating for me is Austen is one of the few writers who I read as a child, I continue to read as an adult, and at every point in my life, I feel like I discover something new in her books and I discover her books in different ways. And that is such a hard thing to do as a writer, but it also is the most magical quality of storytelling. And so, yeah, I love her books. I will probably love her books for the rest of my life, and it speaks to me in like a really deep and meaningful way.
That is so beautifully put.
Yeah, it's I've been thinking about this lately and sort of come to formulate it for myself that the thing that's astonishing about her work is that it has this it's accessible in a certain sense because it's fun. It's delicious, it's funny, it's romantic, and yet it also has this repeatability. It has such depth that you can't really get bored of it the
Yeah.
way you can get bored of some things that are easy to love. She does both.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why there's so much adaptation, I think, because there's such a depth and, like, there it's really a gold mine of things to discover.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think her work is so interesting, as Rose said, because to me, it feels like a modern romance novel rolled into a modern literary novel all into one.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So you can read her books as romance novels, and each of her books have a trope long before tropes were like a thing in popular culture. But at the same time, she has such fabulous social commentary, and she's so witty and clever that it feels like a literary novel. And that is, again, so hard to do as a writer and an artist. She's so good at it.
She's phenomenal at it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Jane Austen is I really think that she has the capacity to make her books simultaneously feel like universal and deeply personal at the same time. And also, there is a thing, I think, in a lot of art forms where the comedies are simply taken less seriously
Hmm.
than the
Hmm.
dramas. And I think Jane Austen's work is sort of a testament to how brilliant comedy can be and how insightful it can be
Here, here.
in the world.
Yeah, well said.
Rose, what about you? What's your relationship to Jane Austen?
I encountered Austen around the same age as Prerna. I think I read Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility first when I was about 11 or 12, and they were a little over my head. Like I got through it, but I didn't feel that sense of like clicking, deep enjoyment. And then a year later, when I was like 13, I picked up Persuasion, and that was the one that really imprinted on me and became my kind of favorite novel forever.
Mm,
And I know that you often ask about what characters people identify with. I
yeah,
mean, it's aspirational, of course, but Anne Elliot is my girl, and she always has been.
I love that.
As someone who IDs as an Eleanor Dashwood, I can say sometimes it's not a self compliment because Jane's characters, by nature of her creating them, are more complex than just
Mm.
being perfect characters. And I think that it is totally relatable to be stoic and panicking about your ex constantly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because Rose already answered Prerna, which Austen character do you relate to the most?
Yes, I, for a long time, loved to think I was a Lizzie Bennet. And I have come to the conclusion in my 30s that I am definitely more of an Anne Elliot because the being stoic and pretending to be strong and not caring, well, again, internally panicking about your ex or anything else is very real. And I think Anne Elliot's growth is so relatable as well because she essentially learns to trust and lean on her own instinct and gain confidence in herself, which is something that I still struggle with, but hope I've gotten better at the older I've gotten. So, yeah, Anne Elliot, she's really popular around here. She's
Yeah.
great. She's my girl.
And to put her needs first, or at least to rank them as a priority, right? That she's so considerate and so compassionate that she, as the younger character in the sort of backstory, she doesn't feel like she's able to say, "This is what I want, and I'm going to go for it, whether other people like it or not, or whether it might potentially harm someone somewhere or not." And I think by the end, she's developed the ability to consider her wishes as at least equally important to anybody else's.
Yeah. It's so appropriate that you both identify as Anne Elliot. One, because we literally just finished Persuasion, and
Mm.
two, because our main character or one of our main characters in Miss Austen is very much Anne Elliot coded.
Mm-hmm.
Keenly and Elliot coded. And it's clear that Jane, in the later portion of her life, and also this particular series we're about to talk about, is really interested in persuasion and what happens when love is lost and you sort of make it past the marriageable age and what happens then. So, completely excellent choice. And we are newly true persuasion stands on this podcast, as you know.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
then our third question is going to be, what piece of Jane Austen content is like currently speaking to you the most in your life? That can be one of her books, it can be an adaptation, it can be a particularly lovely copy of a book.
I think I have too many to choose a favorite, but one that I loved and want to encourage more people to read is a book that came out about 2 years ago called The Scandalous Confessions of Lydia Bennet Witch by Melinda Taub. Um,
Ooh.
it is absolutely delightful. It sort of has Harry Potter vibes along with Jane Austen vibes. It's like a fantasy adventure story, but
Ooh.
it totally works within the way she plays with the world of Jane Austen is very sophisticated. And I was, listening to the audiobook laughing out loud throughout, which I never do when I read Jane Austen things that aren't Jane Austen's original books. And so that's the one that I'd like to recommend.
All
Nice.
right. I will definitely check that out.
Well, mine is also a sort of Austen spin-off that I started reading a couple of years ago, but I just read the latest in the series. I think it's called the Mr. Darcy and Miss Tilney mystery series.
My book club really likes those. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a young adult novel series by a writer named Claudia Gray, and it essentially sets all of the Austen stories in the same general universe and timeline. And it's a murder mystery series that takes place at a time when different Austen couples come together and they all know each other in this world. And the daughter of Lizzie and Darcy, sorry, the son of Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, uh, and goes on an adventure with the daughter of Henry Tilney and Catherine Morland from Northanger Abbey. And it is truly delightful. I didn't think I was going to like it very much when I started reading it. The first one is called The Murder of Mr. Wickham. And it just does such a great job of diving into what makes these characters so lovable and it spins together nostalgia, but also it's a great mystery. There's like a cute love story going on. It's a really delightful way to revisit the Austen verse, in my opinion.
I actually picked this book up at New York Comic Con a year or two ago, because it was at the book stand, and I was like, "This looks amazing!" And then I didn't read it yet because I haven't read Northanger Abbey, and I don't want
Oh,
spoilers on the characters yet.
nice.
That's the only reason I haven't read it. But when the time comes for me to read Northanger Abbey, I will be certainly picking up that series because it's very up my alley.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah. Final question on your relationship to Jane Austen is, what is your hottest Austen take?
I have one. It developed very recently, actually. I think Mansfield Park, which a lot of Austen fans do not love, is highly underrated, and I think it's one of her smartest books.
You know what?
Yeah.
I think that is actually a great way to tell our listeners that that's the next book that we're reading.
Surprise, season 5 of Pod and Prejudice will be covering Mansfield Park, and Molly will learn for herself whether or not it is an underrated masterpiece. I have my own opinions on the matter, that I will not share while Molly is on mic. But I am really excited to cover this one. I think it's going to be fantastic.
And I love to hear that you love it, Prerna.
I am so excited to listen to your guys' podcast episodes about this because, yes, I've grown to love this book more than I thought I ever would, and yeah, can't wait.
Did you, without any spoilers, did you recently read it and come to that conclusion? Like, was there something that sparked your change of heart on it?
Yeah, so I recently reread it because I am visiting family in India, and it's actually one of my mom's favorite Austen novels. And I
Mm.
always struggled with understanding why. And we're dealing with some family crises right now that is forcing us to talk about feelings
Mhm.
and our past, which is not something my parents are great at. And so Mansfield Park is a book that my mom was able to use as an anchor to talk about her life. And I was really fascinated by that. So I reread the book with that lens, thinking about the time my mom grew up in India. She was one of five children, had to do a lot of things on her own. My dad got sent away from his house at the age of 15 because his dad passed away. So there's a lot of things that happen in the book that mirror the way society in India at the time worked, and probably obviously England at the time the book was set in. And I think looking at it from that lens made me appreciate what Austen has done with that novel and what those characters are going through a lot more. So I do think it's one of those books that most people would probably enjoy the older they get and the more life experience they have, kind of like Persuasion.
Mm.
Even though I believe, unlike Persuasion, I don't think it has like this dazzling love story, but it still, I think, is really smart. And the social commentary on it is the closest I think Austen gets to commenting on world political events. And that
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think you don't really see that anywhere else.
Yeah, Molly, if you wanted to go off headphones for like 2 seconds, and then I can tell one of our dear guests to wave you back on because I can't do it. We can give our listeners another Mansfield Park preview. Yeah, I totally agree with you on your take on the book. I think it is not her most romantic work, probably her least romantic novel by a good margin. And that's, Edmund is not, a dashing prince, so to speak. But um, I do agree, like, it is a fascinating novel when you perceive it less as a romance and more as what it means for an outsider to be brought into Jane Austen's world, into the upper classes of British society, which we'll get to in Miss Austen, but that kind of came up here as well. Um, and how vapid and sort of awful it seems to someone who's kind of been thrown into this situation from, from a lower social standing. And I agree with you that it has a sort of morality tale attached to it in terms of Jane Austen's feelings on British imperialism and what she thinks maybe are the vices of the upper classes in England. Anyway, I'm really excited to talk about it with Molly, but obviously can't wait, so I'm talking about it with you now. And I love to. I don't know. I find it meaningful, and I'm really grateful that you shared your personal connection to the story nowadays. So thank you for sharing. And one of you can wave Molly back on as she's eating her snacks.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, Prerna. Thank you for sharing that about how it's beautiful how art and literature, and especially Jane Austen, at least in my world, can provide a mechanism for people to connect on a deep
Yeah,
level. That, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, it's really beautiful. So, my hot take, which I have come to also recently through the process of writing my latest play, The Austens, is that the ending that Jane Austen gives to Marianne in Sense and Sensibility is subversively great.
Yes.
I know we like to debate about Colonel Brandon and Marianne, and is this a story of a girl being, having her light put out? I mean, she's referred to as his reward, right? Is this sort of the family is conspiring to marry her off, even though she doesn't really want to?
Mhm.
That is a valid reading, but the more I think about it, and the more I've been studying other literature of that decade of the 18 aughts, I think another writer would have killed Marianne.
Mm.
I think that Sense and Sensibility came out. It was Austen's first book. Nobody had the idea that Jane Austen was writing romantic comedies. There were lots of books published that did not end with happy marriages. It's not like that was the only genre that was open to her. And in typically stories of the 90s and aughts where a girl misbehaves according to the social rules, she does die. Or at the very least, in Jane West's A Gossip Story, for example, which is also about two
Mhm.
sisters, and one is a rule follower and the other is a rule breaker. The Marianne character, whose name is also Marianne, ends up, she's married, but her husband kind of effectually leaves her. They live separately because they're both too immature to be able to resolve their differences and get along. And so she's alone at the end. But, in Austen's world, she gets to marry Colonel Brandon, who's the richest guy in the book, and also does not want her to change at all.
Mm.
Right? There's that whole conversation with Eleanor early on where Eleanor's like, gosh, I hope Marianne grows up someday. And Colonel Brandon says she's perfect the way she is. She doesn't need to change. And so the idea that this subversive girl who has been rude and sort of danced on the edge of sexual impropriety and so forth, that she ends up in a life where she can basically do whatever she wants. And also, of course, is, sort of co-married to her sister in that they resolve their differences and live right next to each other for the rest of their lives. That's actually a really happy ending in the context of what her readers would have been expecting.
I love that. First of all, I am a Colonel Brandon and Marianne apologist through and through. And we know that on this podcast. But
yeah,
I love what you've pointed out about the fact that these stars that burn bright, these teenage girls that are beautiful and brash and not beholden to their society's norms, even today still die in stories. And the fact that Marianne continues to burn bright and also ends up with someone who values that exact trait in her is beautiful. And I love that.
Yeah, that's really sweet.
Molly's still secretly shipping Eleanor and Brandon.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And when you said like that she's co-married to her sister because she gets to live next door, I'm kind of like, yeah. And Eleanor kind of gets married to Brandon in a way because they get to live next door to each other for life.
Well, the relationship between the sisters is really the central love story in
Of
that
course.
book, right?
Hardcore,
And
yes.
instead of an elaborate marriage, instead of the Captain Wentworth's letter, what we get is Marianne's confession of respect for her sister. That she
Yeah.
says, I should have been more considerate to you. I should have treated you better. And that's like the heart. That's the proposal scene, I think. It's a reconciliation.
Love.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And speaking of sisters being the center of a story, it is now time to discuss the masterpiece miniseries Miss Austen that came out this year, starring Keely Hawes as Cassandra Austen. And Molly, do you want to take our listeners through a brief overview of what this series is about before we dive in?
Yes. So we're not going to go beat by beat on this one because it is 4 episodes.
Yes.
But to give the story of what it is, we get Cassandra Austen as an adult going to look for letters between Jane and Eliza, who is their friend, cousin?
Yes, it's semi invented. Their real third best friend, platonic thruple mate was
Sure.
Martha, who does not exist in the universe of the show.
Gotcha.
But they've
gotcha.
given Eliza was her sister in real life.
I see. So she's looking for these letters, but she goes because the father of Eliza,
Her
brother.
Husband.
See, there were a lot of names and a lot of relationships.
There were.
Before we go further, I feel I should say spoiler warnings here for our listeners who would like to watch the show before listening to us talk about it. This is going to be spoiler coverage. So if you want to watch the show before you listen to us, it's not very long. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say you should watch it before we talk.
There's also the book by Jill Hornby that came out, I think, 2018.
Yes.
Yes. And yes, this is based on a book. Thank you for pointing that out. All things that I learned at the end of the first episode in the credits. But Cassandra goes to the Fowl home and the patriarch is dying and she is supposed to be helping secure the future of Isabella, his daughter. And he dies and she's mostly looking for these letters between Jane and Eliza. And we get flashbacks through the letters throughout. So in episode 1, we get the relationship between Cassandra, who they call Cass or Cassie, and Tom Fowle, who is he real?
Yes.
Is he?
Yes.
He's a real person. Their love story. They are to marry, but first he has to go overseas on a boat. And he says, when I come back, we'll get married. But if I don't come back, please marry someone else. And she says, I promise you here before God, I will not marry any man but you. And then he leaves. And what happens, dear listeners? He dies.
Death.
We also get the backstory of Mary Austen, who marries one of their 3 brothers, which I know at some point I knew that they had 3 brothers, but each brother that was introduced, I was like, "They have a brother?"
They actually had 6 brothers, but only 3 get mentioned in the show.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh my god, 6?
Yeah, 2 daughters and 6 sons.
Imagine how many more names you would have had to keep track of, Molly.
And they're all the same 5 names.
That's too many. So, his wife has died, and he has a daughter named Anna, and Anna is sad because she doesn't have a mommy, and the mother of Jane and Cassandra is like, "Oh, I'll find him a husband or a wife so you oh, I wish it was a husband. I'll find him a wife so you can have a mommy." And they're, like, scheming to get Mary Austen to marry him, and Jane is like, "Are you kidding me? She's awful. What the heck?" But alas, it happens because Cassandra is very rational and is like, "Yes, they should get married. That's a good match." But Mary Austen sucks, and of course, we also see her in the present day where she is like swooping in and taking advantage of Cassandra and making her, you know, do all this stuff. And that's kind of the overview of everything that we learn in episode 1. In episode 2, we get a lot of Cass trying to secure Isabella's future.
And Isabella is Eliza's daughter, whose father just died.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
And also Rose Leslie.
Yes. And in the flashbacks, we get the introduction of Henry Hobday, who is the suitor of Cassandra and who proposes to her, and Cassandra turns him down because she has promised Tom that she would never marry anyone else, even though she knows that Tom is dead and that he would have wanted her to move on. In the present day, in episode 2, Cass gets diphtheria. In episode 3, this is a big one for us, which I feel we're going to delve deeply into when we get into our discussion of themes and such, but this is the episode where, in order to escape Mary coming to town, the sisters go to visit their friends, the Big Withers.
That's right.
Mhm.
Great name.
That's a good name.
And Jane gets drunk in this and accepts a proposal from Harris Bigwither. And then in the morning, well, actually that night, Cassandra's like, "What have you done?" And Jane is like, "You're right." And in the morning, she breaks it off.
That's the lol JK of all time.
Yeah. Also in that episode, the father, Mr. Austen, dies, and their evil brother with Mary in tow kicks them out of their own home, and they are forced to remove to Bath. This is the same thing that has happened to Isabella, or that is going to happen to Isabella in the present day. Her cousin, who is very Mr. Collins coded, which we'll get into later, is trying to kick her out after the death of her father, and that's why Cassandra is there trying to secure their future. Then finally, in episode 4, the wife of one of their other brothers dies, and he asks Cassandra to move in with him and the kids. And Cassandra's like, "I have to take care of Mother and Jane. What if we moved into the cottage at Chawton House?" And that is what they do. But once they're there, Jane's health declines, and eventually she dies, which left both me and Becca in tears this morning.
Me too.
Yeah, it was such a beautiful scene, and we can delve deeper into it in a minute. Meanwhile, in the present day, something that's been going on is that Isabella has been having a romance with Alfie Enoch, and they have been estranged because she turned him down at one point because he didn't have enough money, very Wentworth coded, and then they get back together after some antics on behalf of her maid, which we will get into in a moment. There was probably a better way to do this, but anyway, they get back together and her future is secured, and it kind of all ends happy, but also we're all sobbing.
And also the very most important thing that happens at the very end of the show.
Which is the burning of the letters.
Burning of the letters, yeah.
Cassandra Austen takes all of Jane's letters, and this we know is actually true of Cassandra, and she burns all the ones that could have any sort of anything untoward, shall we say, from Jane to anybody else to preserve her sister's legacy. We know that that is canon, so to speak, in real life. That's historically accurate.
As far as we know, it's semi unverified. I think I actually at the Morgan exhibition
Yeah.
in New
Mm,
York right now that was curated by Juliet Wells. She talks a little bit about how the idea that Cassandra burned a cache of letters is also it's a family anecdote. We don't know
mm,
that
Mm.
for sure. And of course, she preserved more than anybody else,
yes.
so we shouldn't blame her.
Sure. Well, I was gonna ask you, as someone who's done a lot of research on this, like, what makes us think that she burned them, and why is that such a big part of this show of her wanting to burn the letters?
Yeah, I mean, so we do know historically that Cassandra, for example, some of the letters she preserved, she cut out with scissors, things that she didn't want other people to read. And I think, presumably it was either something sort of personal about medical situations that Jane was going through, say, or rude things about her sisters in law that she didn't like, family members that Cassandra probably didn't want their kids to read after dear Aunt Jane was gone. But so in the world of this novel and show, I think it's pretty. Or at least this is how I'm interpreting it. I think this is what they're going for: is that Jane had some kind of mental illness throughout her life, that she was clinically depressed or perhaps bipolar, and that she didn't want. This is my interpretation of the show. Actually, I'm curious to hear how that lands with all of you, having just watched it as well. But that she doesn't want people to remember her that way. I think that's probably not true, based on the evidence we have. Like I think that Jane Austen was remembered by a variety of people as having a fairly sunny disposition. And obviously, she had a wonderful sense of humor, including about herself and her problems, which I sort of wished we saw more of in the show. That said, I thought Patsy Farron was incredible. I really,
Fantastic.
really enjoyed watching her
It's
face
so good.
every minute she was on screen.
Yeah, I think this is a good segue into maybe giving our overall impressions of the show, which I didn't know what to expect from it. I think overall, while an imperfect show, a genuine delight. I loved watching this. I binged it. It was impeccably acted, and it really it for me it was an exploration of what if rather than trying to like capture something precisely. It was sort of like they took the anecdote of Cassandra burning the letters and asked why Cassandra could be burning the letters and use that to tell a really, really beautiful story about two sisters. I read the ending a little differently, and we'll obviously touch base on it as we go because I found this Jane like totally delightful, sassy, and sort of sharp in a certain way, but carefree and devoted to her nieces and nephews and fun loving and thrilled. And what I saw from it was like that Jane, despite her wicked sense of humor and her devilish charm, had an undercurrent of sadness to her that she reserved for those closest to her, and that was the piece of her that she didn't want persisting past those she loved. That's how I read it, but I also think the show really does leave it up for interpretation, and I think Rose's interpretation is a valid one and one that I think comports with the way the show's written and directed. That's my take. I'm curious to hear the hear from the peanut gallery as well.
Yeah, my interpretation. So one, I loved the show. I agree. I think it's an imperfect show, but it very smartly weaves together things that Austen fans love about Austen. It does a lot of great nods and throwbacks to her work, but
Oh
still
yeah.
manages to create a great, complete story and create these beautifully complex characters. I think that it is possible for someone to generally have an outward sunny disposition and like a quote unquote happy relationship with a lot of people around them, but still struggle with mental health and depression.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of what the show was trying to go for. I also think, I don't think it's an invalid interpretation potentially of the way that Jane lived, in part because we do know that she was a woman with a strong mind and ambition at a time when women were really not seen as anything more than wives and mothers. And I think the show does a really good job of bringing out the level of constraint that women like Austen at the time faced. And it does it through the lens of Cassandra, because we do see from the beginning that Cassandra almost sees herself in this nurturing role, in this giving role, and the way that she exists is in relation to other people. And it's something that Jane calls her out on in the show multiple times, especially, and she like keeps pushing her to accept a proposal of marriage that was good for her, and that would have set her up for stability and security. And so I think that the growth arc that Cassandra has is really trying to understand who she is, and who she can be without trying to relate to other people too much. And it's something that she struggled with because of the relationships she has with Jane, but also the fact that she's seen as this aunt who people can call on to take care of their kids, and like don't really ask her what her own desires are. And I think that is the key to, for me, the key to understanding Austen and her work is really her trying to give voice and agency to women and their desires within a society that didn't really think that women's desires were worth anything. And whether those desires were getting married or whether those desires were wanting to become the greatest novelist of all time, those are all valid. And she tried her best to encompass those for her characters. And I think the show did a really good job of portraying that world that she lived in, and what it could have done to someone like her.
Yeah.
Beautifully said.
100%. Yeah. And at the end of the last episode, Mary, who I wasn't expecting to want to quote in this one because she was awful, is on her way out. And Cassandra says something about them like being remembered, or I don't remember what it is that Cassandra says, but then Mary looks back and says, as if anyone is interested in us women. And Cassandra
Mm.
kind of looks at her, and it's like a little nod to the fact that this entire show is about them.
Although I'll just throw in a little critique there. This show absolutely does partake of the all too common trope in biographies of historical women, especially women writers for whatever reason, of framing a lot of the drama around relationships to men.
Oh, sure. It does
Mm.
not pass the Bechdel test.
Right. It might not. I mean, it should. I guess that's the thing that sort of makes me have some reservations about it. Although there was a lot to love about it, and I thought the cast in particular was just stellar.
Yeah.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
that I wasn't sold on the relationship with Henry Hobday, why that was important.
Mhm.
I didn't buy it as a romance, and I as an authentic like connection between these two characters, and I also didn't buy it as a sort of plot point being a wedge between Jane and Cassandra.
I
Personally,
100% agree with that. That was for me the glaring weakness of the show was the Henry Hobday plot. But I didn't.
yeah.
We didn't get Molly to give Molly a chance to gush poetic about the show quite yet.
Well, before we get into our critiques, which we should definitely do, I'll start by saying that the first two episodes I was kind of bored, so that's my critique. I wasn't really following the story. I was kind of confused, and it wasn't until we got to the many down scene that I really locked in, actually, because I was like, this is what is why we picked this, because we were like, we want to talk about something that coincides with your movie that you're making. And I locked in at that point, and from that point on, I was riveted. But I think part of why I was lost is that I was trying so hard to figure out why Cassandra wanted to burn the letters. Um, but again, like I said, we should talk about our critiques, but I had a couple things that really stuck with me that I wanted to wax poetic about. The one being the relationship between Isabella and Mr. Littledale, played by Alfie Enoch, who is so handsome
Mm.
and
Mhm.
just has these eyes. And the actress who played Isabella,
Rose Leslie
Rose Leslie,
of
was
Downton Abbey and Game of Thrones fame.
oh, okay.
She's
Well,
in
she's
everything.
stunning. She's so
Oh,
talented. I think maybe, so Becca and I were texting earlier and we were like, this is the first piece of Austen content that has genuinely had us weeping. And I also was sitting there this morning gasping and giggling like a child when Isabella and Mr. Litterdale were standing outside the house, and he walks away and he stops and they've said goodbye, and then he puts his bag down and he turns around and they run to each other and they kiss. I was like giddy in a way that I haven't actually been in any Regency era romance that I've watched or read. I think
Yeah.
maybe part of that is because we have been dissecting Austen's books so closely and looking at every character from every angle and all of this stuff that, like, I go in with expectations of certain levels of dreaminess, and this was just, like, getting to have kind of a new story, but also sort of through that framework of, in their case, persuasion, because she turned him down because her father said no, and that he was of lower birth than them, but her father is dead now, and she's like, "Wait a minute, I still love this man." That was really dreamy, and then the relationship between Jane and Cassandra and their final moments together left me in tears. Just the whole speech that Cassandra gives her as she's dying, when she's telling her how loved she is and how important she is and how lucky she is as a sister to have been blessed to have loved her. Like, it was so beautiful.
That's when I
So
was like ugly sobbing.
bawling. So, yeah, a lot of the writing is really beautiful. The acting was all stunning. There were really no duds. The only issues that I really had with it were plot points that I imagine were manufactured.
Mhm.
Though we've obviously read a lot of Jane Austen, but because I've been avoiding spoilers, I haven't read a lot about her life. Now that we're 4 books in, I figured we were probably safe to watch this. And there was only one moment where I was like, "We're talking about a book I haven't read yet," but, like, this it was kind of my first introduction to learning more about Austen's life, and so I do need to now go and do my research and find out what was true and what wasn't, but I was like, how much of these letters are real?" I kind of like to believe that a lot of them were, but I'm curious about that, and I'm definitely gonna go to the Morgan exhibit.
It's really great. Yeah.
That's what's great about this, I think, is that every piece of content related to Jane Austen is great because it gets people excited about Jane Austen and wanting to learn more. So, yeah, that's my kind of word vomit impression.
And people learning and connecting with each other around art is a beautiful thing.
Yes.
It's good for the world as well as for us. Yeah.
Especially A Sister's Tale, which is, my favorite type of
Becca's
tale,
favorite,
personally.
yeah.
I love A Sister's Tale. So back to a critique.
Yes, sure.
I think what was most successful, as we kind of all 4 of us have touched on in this story, for me, was the real love story, as Rose kind of beautifully put it about Sense and Sensibility, is the sister love story. Like, the thesis of the show is that Jane Austen was the love of Cassandra Austen's life beyond anybody else. And that, I think, sung really true to me in the 4th episode. I think, that being said, the male lovers of Cassandra Austen didn't translate as well. I thought Thomas Fell, her real
Mhm.
life lover, I thought that translated quite well, but obviously he dies within like the first 30 minutes, uh,
Yeah.
because yellow fever and the economics of dating a Jane Austen having to take him all the way to the West Indies. But I think that Max Irons as Henry Hogday. First of all, Max Irons is stunningly beautiful, and this is not the
Mhm.
the
Very, very
actor's
cute.
fault. He's a very handsome man. He's been in 8,000 things, and every time he's more attractive than the last. I'm like, he can't possibly have been this attractive. I would have remembered him being this attractive in the last one. He's so
You know,
handsome.
he was that attractive, for
He's
sure.
even more, every time I watch him on screen, he's more attractive. He was also like Edward the Fourth in The White Queen, which is a show nobody watched with Rebecca Ferguson, now of Dune fame.
Oh.
But I loved that show because I'm a Shakespeare dork. But that's a derailment. But I thought, like, for me, the single most difficult plot device to buy was Cassandra turning down Henry's second proposal. Because
Mhm.
the first time she says she does it because of Tom, which is stupid but sort of duty bound. The second time she says she's doing it for Jane. And that was where it lost me, because it didn't really make sense. Because at this point in the story, the Austens are essentially living in squalor for high class British people, and they don't have a lot of options. And there's 2 daughters who are both unmarried. And nothing would make Jane more secure and comfortable than Cassandra marrying an incredibly wealthy man who could then move her into his extremely large mansion. So I didn't totally buy that that was like a great reason to turn down a proposal.
No, it was quite a bad reason to turn down a proposal,
Yeah.
actually.
Right. And what confused me a little bit about, I think this was a weakness in the writing, is that the Many Down incident happens between those 2
Mhm.
proposals. So what we see on screen is Cassandra says, "I turned him down because of Tom Fowl." And then Jane apparently hears, "I turned him down because of you." So Jane's like, "Okay, I'm gonna go get myself married," so she's free to marry. But that's not actually what we were shown
No.
until later in the story. And so the arc of it just didn't quite make sense to me.
Though there was a moment where Jane says, well, when she's upset about having just accepted a proposal from Harris Bigwither, she's like, well, one of us has to secure our futures, which
That's
is
true.
an interesting point, but not what she said. That is not the reason that she gives for going after
Right.
him in the first place. Yeah.
I also think that I agree. I think that the Henry Hobday storyline was the thing that worked the least for me in this show because it felt a little forced, where they were trying really hard to fit in this trope of the two sisters who everyone thinks is fighting over a man are kind of fighting over a man, but not for the reasons you think they are. So it's trying to be really
Mm,
smart about it. And I
Uh-huh.
think in another context it could have worked really well. But in this case, it kind of felt forced because it just the characters' motivations for what they were doing were just not clear. Like,
Mhm.
I think it would have worked better if they'd shown Henry Hobday to be someone who is like rich, but maybe not very nice, or very nice, but not very rich. So, like, it kind of, as like Jane kept saying, he was kind of perfect. And it was like, okay, what are you doing, Cassandra? Like, this
yeah.
isn't just about you, it's about everyone else. And my other critique, which I think ties into the Henry Hobday storyline a little bit, is at least the little historical record that we do have about the Austens, and you should all check out Rose's play when it is being performed because it goes into this in detail. But the Austen family, and especially the women in Jane's life, Cassandra, her mom, after her father's death, and then their friend Martha Lloyd, who lived with them for many years in Chawton, they kind of structured their life and their schedule in a way that gave Jane a lot of time to write. Like, it was
Mhm.
very clear from the historical record that Jane's writing was like a really big part of the family's life. And despite what they showed Mrs. Austen to be, of like this like matchmaking mother who just wants her daughters to get married, kind of like, they all wanted Jane to write and they supported her writing. And I don't think that came out enough in the show. Like, it didn't come out enough that Cassandra, as with everyone else, really thought Jane was capable of being a great writer. And I think it's a missed opportunity because, especially at the time, we know that women's families, especially, were not supportive of them having desires and a life outside of being a wife. So, a huge part of what I think Jane Austen's success as a writer can be attributed to is the fact that she had this wonderfully supportive community around her, mostly a community of women who believed in her writing and gave her the space and the time to be able to do that. And I think that didn't come out well enough in the show.
Right. It is historically true that her father was supportive of of her writing, and we he sent the first query letter to a publisher on her behalf in 1797, and gave her her notebook and her writing desk. But yeah, we don't see the as much support in the show from the women who, as Prerna says, when they moved to Chawton, Martha and Cassandra took care of the household. Mrs. Austen took care of the garden. Jane's only responsibility, this is the family lore, was to make breakfast and keep track of the keys to the wine and tea. And the rest of the time, she was sitting in that dining room herself writing, while the other ladies were going about their business or sitting in the parlor.
Mm.
On a quick side note, that does sound just delightful being in like a little cottage in England with your besties writing all day.
Life goals.
Yeah,
The dream.
truly. And that, as Perna said, my new play, The Austens, which takes place in 1810, so it's the year after they moved to Chawton Cottage, and the year before Sense and Sensibility finally came out. A big sort of thesis of the play is that it takes a village. What a lot of both moral and practical support is required for even the most brilliant artist to do their work.
Oh, I
Mm.
love
Um,
that.
and that it is really about the valuing the arts, and that being around people who value the arts it's an essential part of Jane's life and her legacy, what we have from her.
So I agree that I didn't get that from most of the women in the story. I personally did get that from how they portrayed Cassandra herself. I think what the story was going for was kind of a duo of sorts, where Cassandra was the great sacrificer who tended to Jane so Jane could become Jane Austen. That's how I sort of read what they were doing. And there were these scenes where Cassandra would be walking back and forth, reading her pages, talking her through her story points, and like she had the characters that Jane had written in her head like a Rolodex throughout the whole story,
Mm.
which gave me this sense that like she had just been sitting and reading her sister's work. And then there was this moment at the very end of the show when it gave us a flashback of the two sisters where Cassandra was sitting with the pages on a couch behind Jane, who was writing and laughing. And you saw the smile creep up Jane's face in a way that made me feel like Jane
Mm.
was writing to delight Cassandra.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
that was one of those moments where I really cried. But I do think that it came at the expense of some of the other women in the stories, and that's another like minor critique I have. There's really a lot of shine on the beautiful, astonishingly beautiful relationship between Cassandra and Jane, but I do think it comes at the expense of some of the characterizations of some of the other characters. Like I actually quite loved Mary Austen in this, not as a person, but I thought she was a fascinating character for her highly complex feelings for Jane, because some of the ire she feels towards her feels a little justified, because you do get the sense that Jane has made her feel small. But also she just the like level of bitterness she has kept in her soul for Jane, and the way in which she is callous and careless to Cassandra makes you hate her. That would have sat a little better with me if it wasn't as I felt like every sister-in-law in this story was a nightmare, for
Mm.
one reason or another. And I was like, well, they don't all have to be nightmares. They can get along with some of their brothers' wives.
Right. They didn't. They got along with Mary Gibson Austen, I think, Frank's wife, who lived with them in Southampton, but they didn't show
Mhm.
her. Yeah.
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 And then there was the one who collected stuffed birds and things in the present day. It was but that was a fake person, right? Yeah.
I think that was a real person. I don't know if that's anything like what she was like.
Got it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So James's wife Mary, she had two sisters, Martha, who was Jane and Cassandra's roommate for a long time, and I think their actual lifelong best friend, and then Eliza, who is only mentioned once or twice in Jane's letters, but she becomes the third friend in this story. So they take out Martha and they combine her with Eliza. And so she was a real person. She was married to the brother of Cassandra's fiance who died. So they weren't related, but they had various ties by marriage and so forth.
Yeah. I also do want to clarify because I don't know if you said this, but I don't think Henry Hobday is real. I think that was like a made up storyline.
Well, so I don't have to be like saying, "Oh, this is real, this is not real" the whole time. So you could just tell me to shut up.
No, we
No,
love
I
it.
love this.
I need it for my sanity.
Okay. Well, so the story is actually that the mysterious Sidmouth lover was Jane's lover. Apparently, one of the nieces, I think probably Caroline or Anna, wrote down, recorded that towards the end of her life, Cassandra died in 1845. Cassandra met a young man that she was so taken with, and so she thought he was so charming, and she said he reminds me of this guy that we met by the seaside, 40 years ago, who I think could have captured Jane's heart. So apparently, the story is that they met a man while they were on vacation and had a real strong connection, and then he was going to come visit them and follow up the relationship, but he died.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
So Jill Hornby, the novelist, took that sort of grain of an apocryphal anecdote and reworked it to make it so that Cassandra initially wants him to be with Jane, but actually it's her that he's matching with.
Yeah, because that there was like the slightest moment where because she knows that she's still beholden to Tom, she's like, "Actually, I think he would be good for Jane." And Jane's like, "What?"
Yeah, I think, I mean, again, the historical record, which is very incomplete, suggests that basically the family lore is that Cassandra never looked at another man after Tom died,
Mhm.
and that she was content with being a single woman and staying with her birth family for the rest of her life, and that part of the reason Jane made the choices she did was that she knew she could be with Cassandra because neither of them was going to marry.
Ah, I do love this idea of these two sisters being the loves of each other's lives. That's really like hit home for me in a very specific way.
Yeah.
We should talk a little bit about the three Fowles daughters. They were an interesting addition to this story because the story starts, for context, with the death of their father, Fulmar Fowles, who's a family friend of the Austens, and Cassandra goes to him in his last night of life, in part to say goodbye to him, and then also in larger part to gather his late wife's letters from Jane so she can control Jane's narrative, essentially. That is where we meet Isabella Fowles, who is the young daughter who we referenced as being played by Rose Leslie, and who has to pack up her father's parish for her cousin. And she has two sisters in the story, and the father's dying wish is that this girl be with her sisters. And Cassandra, coming from a level of excruciating bias on how good sisters are, is like, amazing. I will give her to her sisters, and that her two sisters are excruciatingly bad in two very weird ways. So yeah, I was interested in this because I think these characters are an example of they existed, but they were names on a page without a lot of life behind them, and that they were each captured in sort of a brand new light in this story.
Yeah, as far as I know, none of those individuals has ever been given a fictional treatment before.
Yeah.
They're just distant connections of the famous Austens.
I think it is interesting that they had that storyline in there because we do know that Jane got remarkably lucky with her sister and the relationship that they had, as far as we know. But from her books, she's also aware that there are sister pairings that are not great. Like whether it's
Yeah.
within the same set of sisters, like the Bennets, or Persuasion, where the sisters clearly don't have a good relationship with each other in different ways. And so I do think it was nice that the show was able to do that, have that contrast where you see Jane and Cassandra who truly love each other and have this beautiful relationship, and then you see Cassandra believe that everyone has that with their sisters, and then is like has to open her eyes to the fact that that's not the case, and you can have sisters who don't like each other and are not great for each other.
Absolutely. I want us to talk about we've started to talk about it a little bit, but all of the ways that this show looped in inspiration from different Austen characters and storylines.
Yeah, Molly and I made a list of homage characters and plot points that we clocked from our watch of this. Now there's one that I didn't put down here because I think it's potentially a Mansfield nod that I didn't want to raise for Molly, but here is a non-exhaustive list of some of the characters that we clocked as direct references to Austen characters, starting with the first episode. The new rector that comes to the parish is our dear old Mr. Collins.
And he even looks like him too.
I totally did that on purpose, I think.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
yeah.
100%.
Oh, yeah. Next one was the scene where Mary and James Austen come to the Austen parish house and tell their father that he should leave and give the rectory to James. And then they have to move to Bath, much to Jane's particular chagrin. That to me was just straight up Fanny Dashwood and John Dashwood
Yeah.
kicking the Dashwoods out of Norland, for sure.
Yes, I agree. And I feel like it was reaching for Sense and Sensibility in a way that didn't actually fit the given circumstances of the in other words, in real life, James would have had no power to dislodge his father. It seems
No.
improbable to me that they sort of bullied them into doing it. And Anna Austen recorded later that she felt like her grandparents were so happy when they were in Bath that it was like, they finally got to move to Florida and retire. Yeah.
So very different vibes.
So yes, but definitely in the show, an allusion to Sense and Sensibility. I totally agree.
I also saw that moment a little bit as an allusion to Mr. Bennet in Pride and Prejudice, where like you have a dad who's like really lovable and cute and nice, and then he makes sort of, in my opinion, bad choices that sets his family, a lot of his family, up for financial insecurity and instability. And that scene also didn't quite work for me because I was kind of like, I don't really know how I'm supposed to interpret Mr. Austen here because like this was just an objectively impractical decision to make if like it actually played out the way it did in the show, which I don't think is how it played out in real life. Because to Rose's point, it seemed like everyone except maybe Jane was happy to go to Bath.
Yeah.
And also it wasn't they say, oh, this is such a big house for you to manage, but actually what would have been hard for him to manage after he turned 70 was the farm, right? It was a rectory, so
Yeah.
it had
Yeah.
farmland attached, and I think he was probably eager to give that up and pass it on to his son.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, speaking of him, Becca and I have very different thoughts on Mrs. Austen.
Yeah, we have to pull them.
Yeah. I mean, I think you both, based on what you've said so far, will agree with Becca, but I had one. Well, Becca can go first and I'll give a counter argument.
So going back to this whole changing sort of the actual truth of Jane Austen's life to kind of make like an homage to her books, that is a clear moment of changing the narrative to allude to Sense and Sensibility. I thought the changing of Mrs. Austen, her mother, was clearly, for me, had two purposes. One, it gave us Mrs. Bennet from Pride and Prejudice, but with like a Mr. Woodhouse from Emma Rising because of her obsessions with apothecaries and biliousness and the amount of jokes we got about Mrs. Austen's poop. I'm not gonna lie, not always a fan, but I think they kind of pulled it off here. I thought it was funny.
And of course, that is in Jane Austen's letters. She talks about
Her mom's biliousness.
her mom,
Oh
yes,
my God, incredible.
yeah, and how she always has this when when they arrive at a new place.
And those are the letters Cassandra did not burn. So
Right. Exactly.
True. I did forget about that part, to be honest, when I wrote my note, because I watched the first 2 episodes a few days prior to watching the second 2 episodes. So I do agree that she definitely has some Mr. Woodhouse in her, but I do see also in the second half of the series some Mrs. Dashwood in her, particularly when Cassandra, after their father dies, when Cassandra is going through all of the paperwork and Mrs. Austen is like, "You really are holding our family together right now, and we're so lucky to have you." The
Yeah.
way that she's in mourning reminds me of Mrs. Dashwood.
Yeah. That I felt that scene when Cassandra's going over the finances and talking about where they're going to live and so forth is was very much Sense and Sensibility, Eleanor.
Yeah, and then
yeah.
and of course Jane storming out because
Mhm.
she's upset that she doesn't contribute anything to the family is
Mhm.
reading very Marianne in that moment.
And mad at her brother Edward for not being more generous.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
which comes straight out of the book.
Absolutely. And I that goes to another point that I had is I thought that the story fluctuated between giving us an energy between Cassandra and Jane that was reminiscent of Jane and Lizzie Bennet. And especially in the later half of the series, a lot of Eleanor and Marianne coming off these two.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that does accord with the historical record as we know it.
Mhm.
The idea that Jane, that she looked up to Cassandra, the Niece and Senephas, again, recorded most of the sort of private anecdotes we have about her, that she would always defer to Cassandra, that she would say, "Oh, I can't tell you about that, but Cassandra knows all about that. She's so smart." And the fact that her first two novels feature this central pair of sisters, and you have the older one who's a little bit more perfect, and the younger one who's a little bit more rebellious and plays the piano.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was Jane Austen a prolific piano player?
She was. She played every morning. There's a new book out about her sort of life as a pianist and vocalist as well,
Oh.
called She Played and Sang by Gillian Dooley. But yeah, we have her music books. She had a beautiful handwriting for copying sheet music. Some of that's in the Morgan too.
So, living in a cottage in England with her besties, writing a book and building in time for karaoke is like, I don't know. I mean, that seems like utopia to me, but that's fine.
You're
I mean,
right.
frankly, I think she had a pretty great life, even if it wasn't very long. And for the time, people probably pitied her. Like, I feel like, and this is me just completely extrapolating based on what we know, it feels like she was quite content with where she ended up because she was able to do what she loved. And there was no other way she would been able to do that if she had been married. And I think they touch upon this. I'm segueing a little bit into episode 3 here, but they kind of touch upon it there where she says, I'm going to have duties and responsibilities as like a wife and a mother.
Oh, so said something about being pregnant all the time and how
Mhm.
horrified she was about that prospect. Yeah.
And we do know in real life that Harris Bigwither, the person he did end up marrying, he ended up having, I think, like 10 children.
Yes.
So
Bullet dodged, girl.
She knew.
it's quite likely we would never have her books, or at least the books in the form that we know, if she was married. So in the grand scheme of things, I think she had quite a content life and lived in a way that felt true to herself, which I think is really beautiful.
I totally agree. And I think that's why she is such a role model, right? It's not just that she made great art, although she did, but also, again, yeah, as you say, she seems to have lived life on her own terms and been kind of a delightful person. And obviously not perfect or not, we can all sort of project our own identities onto Jane Austen, and we don't know that much about her. But I do feel that the family's recollections that she was just like Cassandra said, the sun of my life, the gilder of every pleasure.
Mhm.
I had not a thought concealed from her, and it feels as if I've lost a part of myself.
Oh.
Such a moving letter that she wrote to Fanny Knight 2 days after Jane died.
I'm legit gonna cry again.
Yeah.
I know, right?
Damn.
Yeah.
We've already talked a little bit about or a lot about how Isabella and Mr. Litterdale are giving Anne and Wentworth. So the last big like book reference that I wanted to touch on was obviously Dinah and the Stairs,
The Cobb.
the Cobb.
Fucking Cobb.
While they're reading this portion of Persuasion, which I loved this scene, by the way, it was cutting between Jane originally listening to Cassandra reading it, and then back to Cassandra reading it to Isabella, and Isabella being like, "How could she do this to us?" And see how everyone was reacting to the Cobb so dramatically. It was just so beautiful and so funny, and also just like it shows like how timeless the story is. But as she's reading this, Anne calls for a surgeon, and then Dinah goes, "A surgeon," and she runs up the stairs and throws herself off of them so that Isabella will be forced to call Mr. Litterdale.
Once again, a plot point that didn't entirely translate, especially because, and we didn't talk about this, Cass has her own fever moment, which is again very Marianne from Sense and
Uh-huh.
Sensibility
Uh-huh.
in like her older time when Isabella's looking after her. And Mr. Litterdale, Isabella's love interest, is a surgeon. And she's like, no, we don't need to call my ex. I will nurse her back to help myself. And I was like, girl, now is not the time for your petty romance drama. Someone's dying.
I totally agree.
That part did make me really mad. I will not lie. Because I'm literally like, she is going to die. You need a qualified medical professional to take a look at her. Like, you cannot just put wet cloth on her head and hope it will go away, which is, I think, ultimately what she did. But,
Yeah.
like, it really made me
But
mad.
like he literally showed up and he asked if she had gotten the cold of the woman that he was tending to when she came to see him. And Isabella said
Diphtheria is not a
no.
cold either. It's
Right, it's
really
not a cold.
serious.
Yeah, yeah, she caught diphtheria, and then later Mary's like, "I hope you're recovered from your cold." Anyway, he comes and offers help basically, and she's like, "No."
Right. So why would Dinah think it will work a second time?
And why does it work a second
I
time?
think that she's grown.
I feel like it's a little problematic that she's like literally risking her neck
Yeah.
so that her boss can, like, she must be really obsessed with the upper classes.
It's giving Samwise Gamgee hardcore.
Well, also the lesson from the Cobb and Persuasion is kind of like, don't do this. Like, she almost dies, and then her entire personality changes. So maybe, like,
Yeah.
do not risk injuring yourself for like romance. I
Yeah.
don't know.
It's such a catalyst in Persuasion to Anne and Wentworth reconciling, but only because Wentworth realizes how stupid it is to date someone who would jump off of stairs. Like, yeah, that didn't work. But I do agree the scene leading up to it was perfect when they were reading the Cobb
Yes.
scene.
Mhm.
Particularly, I want to call it out, and we haven't waxed quite poetic enough about Patsy Farron's performance as Jane, which is
So good.
Oh,
sublime.
so good.
Oh, good.
The shit-eating grin she had on her face when Cassandra was reading that portion. She goes, "My God, you've killed her." And she kind of had this like, ha ha ha, I got you invested in my book.
Yeah, she
Ugh.
just has such an expressive face. And I think you said this to me, Prerna, before I had watched it, that you feel like she's always thinking, that you really, you can see her eyes working and
Yes.
feel her intelligence sort of radiating off of her.
Absolutely. And there was like pathos with it too. It was not a cold intelligence. It was imbued with so much warmth.
Yes.
Sensitivity.
It is, I feel like there's a lot of characters like the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock Holmes really started a trend of like these like sort of non-social geniuses, antisocial geniuses that
Yes.
are like that like don't buck society's trends, and they're varying in terms of their level of success. But I do think that in this in particular, Jane, you get the sense that she's a rebel and that she doesn't care for society's norms, but she is beloved by everyone in her life, and she is just this like that magnet of a person people are drawn to no matter how sort of impertinent she is. And like the level of care she puts into her family and her siblings children, it was just like I really loved her performance. It was so nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they allude to that genius thing that you just said, Becca, which was that in the show where I think it's Isabella's character who asked Cassandra, like, geniuses are supposed to be really difficult to get along with. And like, was Jane really difficult? And Cassandra doesn't directly answer that question. She just calls her a perfectionist. But I do think the show in and of itself answers that question, which is like, she was a genius and she was witty and sarcastic and she might have said mean things, but they're probably mean things that were true,
Yeah.
that other people didn't want to say. But that doesn't mean that she didn't love the people she loved dearly. Like she loved her sister, she clearly loved her niece, loved other people in her life, her friends, and I think it is kind of groundbreaking and subversive to show a genius who has this capacity for love and empathy
Mhm.
because that's not what we normally see in popular culture.
Well said. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way.
Very well said.
Absolutely. I will add one more kind of homage without giving Molly any spoilers for Mansfield Park. I was getting a bit of a Norris vibe off of one of the sisters, Isabella's sisters
Mm.
from Mansfield.
Yes.
And that's all I will say on the matter. So as to not spoil Molly, but I think Rose and Brandon both agree with me.
Yeah.
Before we get into our wrap up questions, I want to jump back to episode 3 because it relates so deeply to Many Down, the short film that you two are creating. How do you feel they handled the single night proposal and engagement of Jane and Harris Big Withers?
I'm sure I'm coming at this from a place of bias because I have seen Rose's research on this subject and that particular situation. I think that I see what they were trying to do for dramatic effect with that proposal scene and the aftermath of it as it relates to the story they were trying to tell, but I don't necessarily think that it was very accurate. And I don't want to spoil too much because we are obviously going to address this in our film. But kind of the main thing that we do know is that Jane and Cassandra have been friends with the big sisters. It's very funny. I think the sisters are called the big sisters, but the men are called the Withers.
That's right.
It's all very
So
confusing.
they inherited Many Down estate from, a cousin or uncle, and as part of the condition of the inheritance, the men of the family had to take the surname of the estate holders, which was Wither. So Harris and his dad are officially the Big Withers, colloquially referred to as Mr. Wither, usually, but the sisters retained their original surname, which was Big.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very confusing. But we do know that they were friends with the Austen sisters for a while. Were very close.
They grew up together.
They grew up together. So ostensibly, Jane has known Harris her whole life. And this is not something that kind of came out of the blue. Like it was definitely something that a lot of people thought. And they do allude to it with the sisters, but it to me, the way that they showed it in the show, it felt very sudden. And that was not the case from what we do know of the time and the relationship that they had with those sisters. That this was, even though this is like a kind of a spoiler, but not really, because if you look up the incident, you'll find it. But Harris is, and I don't think they talk about this in the show, but Harris is 21 or not even, or just 21, and Jane
Hmm.
is almost 27. So they do have a bit of an age gap between them that is not commonly seen amongst at the time. We usually see the man being a lot older than the woman, not the other way around.
There are hardly any instances in Austen's novels. I think Mr. Collins and Charlotte are the only one where the
Or
woman
where
is
the woman
older.
is older. And so I think that it doesn't hit upon a lot of these things, which makes that particular relationship kind of unique. And I think it missed an opportunity to tell like a more complete story about the proposal itself. But I understand why, because the story is not about the proposal. And I do think it did a good job of showing the sister relationship and how that came out as a result of the proposal and how it evolved. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say about the matter.
Yeah, I liked the way the sort of family dinner was set up, that kind of everybody's in on it, and Jane's giving some signals, and I thought that section was really nicely done in the show. The scene afterwards between Jane and Cassandra is very different from how Prerna and I have imagined it. And I think, one of the central differences is that in Jill Hornby's universe, it's about a man, right?
Mhm.
Jane says or implies that she is trying to set Cassandra up with Henry Hobday, and she thinks that by marrying Harris, somehow that will facilitate that arrangement.
Which hasn't been alluded to up until that point. Like, where did she come up with that idea?
Yeah, and also like again, the Henry Hobday story is invented. I don't think it's about a man. I think it's about her art,
Mm.
and I think that's a more interesting story and one that we don't get told as much. So I'm a little let down by that moment in the context of Miss Austen.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's a world in which they could have done this story with the proposal and Hob Day to basically be like, more explicit. Maybe what they were going for was Cassandra. Like I said, I got the sense Cassandra's duty in life was to the love of her life, Jane, and that everything she did in her life was to facilitate the genius that was her sister. And I think if they'd been a little bit more explicit that Cassandra didn't want, at a certain point, didn't want to get married and didn't want to have children because she wanted to make Jane what she would one day be. And that she didn't want Jane to marry because she wanted Jane to become what she would be. I think that would have been extraordinary
Hmm.
as a way to make that story come together. It was so close. If they had been a little bit more explicit about, oh, this isn't something Cassandra's necessarily just purely sacrificing. She deeply cares about making sure that no matter what, Jane publishes these novels.
I'm so glad you said that, and that is it. Well, I think you'll like the film when it comes out.
Fabulous.
But also, I think all the evidence suggests that Cassandra was the biggest advocate for Jane's writing,
Yeah.
and that, as you say, it wasn't like in the show. It seems like I got the impression that sort of the gist of it was Jane is kind of unstable, so she needs me to take care of her. And I think in the way I've imagined it, based on the evidence that we have, is that it's Jane is a genius, and she needs somebody to help her find the right circumstances so she can do her work.
I
Mm.
think a lot of the thesis of Miss Austen is that, but I think it did not come across in the Hobbs plotline where it really needed to. And that is where I think they sort of dropped the ball writing wise. That being said, I think that the proposal scene was a delight for the sheer reason that I think it was the funniest portion of the
Hmm.
entire series.
I laughed
Um,
out loud.
I between the seaside conversation and the part at the end when she walks in holding his arm, the physical comedy emanating off of that moment.
Yeah.
It was
So
hilarious.
funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, favorite line delivery,
If we have them.
yes, if we have them. I'll start by saying for me, I will allude to a scene. We sort of talked about it before, but I think the strongest scene in the show is Jane Austen's death scene in the last episode. The whole sequence where she's lying in her bed and Mary comes in and then Cassandra comes back because Mary's come in to essentially relieve Cassandra of her duty of staying over Jane's bed in case she passes away. And in that whole sequence, there's this wonderful moment where Mary and Jane, who have been at odds the entire story, laugh with each other at how delightfully good at cards Jane is. And then Cassandra stands outside the room and sobbing. And, I'm on the couch in my Brooklyn apartment sobbing. And then she comes back in the room and she says she found it very touching to hear them, have a warm moment together. And Jane, in her like last moments of life, is still witty, and she says something to the effect of, "Oh, Mary's a real charmer when things are dire. It's only when people are happy that she's a nightmare." I did that's not a verbatim quote, but I thought it was a perfect moment in the show.
And it's a paraphrase of something she wrote in a letter.
Oh,
Oh,
incredible.
perfect.
Yeah, like that, Mary's good in this kind of situation.
It's so good.
My favorite, I guess, line, and I'm not gonna try to say it verbatim, but it's kind of towards the end. It's more of like a letter. So when Cassandra is reading Jane's letter, and Jane very clearly states that she trusts Cassandra to safeguard her legacy, I think that moment is really beautiful because everything in that show has been leading up to this moment. But really, when you think about it, so much of Cassandra's life has been leading up to this moment. And I think that it shows just a level of trust that I think is very hard to achieve with any person, where you say, I will be gone and I will have no control over any of this. And I trust this person to faithfully interpret what I would have wanted to do in each circumstance and like create the legacy that is needed. And I think it was particularly interesting to me if I think about it in real life, because at the time that Austen died, her novels were popular, but she hadn't achieved, I think, the level of sort of greatness and fame and people saying that she was this hardcore genius, because her whole career sadly was really short, thanks to that fucking, sorry, I'm swearing, but that publisher who never published Northanger Abbey, and we could have had like a much longer time. And as someone who has been dealing with the publishing industry and agents and querying, like, unfortunately not a lot has changed in like 200 plus years of all of this stuff happening. And so her career in her own lifetime was incredibly short lived, and she didn't really live to see the levels of her own greatness and how people talked about her. But Cassandra saw a lot of it. And
Yeah.
I think what was really interesting to me is Jane was almost like certain in a way, like deeply intuitively certain that there would come a time when her legacy would need to be safeguarded. And she has sort of like just implicit trust in Cassandra to be able to do that. And I don't think people ever like most of us go through life never having a relationship like this. And that encompasses so much of what their relationship was like. And I think that's just so beautiful. And I think that was the part that really made me cry after Jane's death scene because it was like it's so hard to find this, and in her books we just see the romantic love between man and woman because that's all she was allowed to write about, but in real life it was really this soulmate level relationship she has with her sister that is so beautiful and so hard to find.
And she did make Cassandra the heir to all her copyrights, which
Mm.
I don't know if that was unusual, but I sense it might be. I think that given that women didn't directly deal with business, like most of her sort of interactions with the publisher were managed by a brother, it sort of would have made sense if she'd left it to Henry, but she didn't because he's not the one.
He's not the one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's really beautiful.
I have an honorable mention. There's a great moment in the first episode when Mr. Collins, the pastor who's in this, is talking about how much he loves Jane Austen. And he goes, "Oh, I love, there's the one with the clergyman. Which one was that?" And she says, "Oh, they all have clergymen." And then he cuts her off and he goes, "Mansfield ground."
Yes.
Yes, that was very good. My best line delivery is a line that I think encompasses the kind of biting wittiness of Jane Austen herself. It's when she's talking about how perfect Henry Hobday, I think, is. And she says, "As a woman of many faults, I abhor faultlessness in others."
So good.
Yeah, that really sounds like her, doesn't it?
It
But
does.
it's not a direct quote. Yeah.
Yeah, so good on the writers for really getting her tone down,
Here, here.
and good on the actress who said it with such a wry smile and just, like, really hit home every single time. She did not miss.
Yeah.
So good.
So then I think we can go to favorite, least favorite part. Let's start with least favorite part because it will end on the happier stuff.
Mine, I'll just say really quick, is the second proposal from Henry Hobday because I was so confused. One, why he's proposing when he just told her that he's engaged to someone else. Like,
Yes.
what a weird moment to do this. And also, like, it implies that he's been pining after her for all this time. And then two, as we've already discussed, her turning him down again is just weird and wrong.
Yeah, I would say it's like a hard competition between that one and just like the first entire Henry Hobday situation and Cassandra saying, "I did this for you, Jane." And you're like, "No, you didn't. You did it at the time. At least what you told us is because you made this pledge to Tom, who never asked you to make this pledge. But if you were actually thinking of Jane, like you would have accepted this proposal because it would have set her up for life and you, and it would have all been fine." So I think that whole scene was just very confusing and felt very forced and did not really work for me at all.
Yeah.
I agree. One of my least favorite things about the, or not least favorite, it's not really least favorite thing, but what I felt like was a missed opportunity, sort of in the service of giving us something that feels like a Jane Austen story, was that the costumes were all kind of averaged out to about 1810s for every moment in the story. Like,
Mm.
it would have been easier for the audience to process the two timelines if they'd had distinctive costumes,
Mm.
but instead you have the people who are in the 1790s wearing 1810s fashions, and then you have the people in the 1830 wearing basically 1810s fashions with a couple of 1821 sleeves, but like, and I think probably because Jane Austen's novels all came out in the 1810s, so those are the styles that we associate with her adaptations, so they probably wanted the photos to evoke Jane Austen adaptation, and I can understand that from a marketing perspective, but it seems like it did a disservice to the audience following the story.
Totally.
I am, as the audience knows, a little costume illiterate, but I entirely agree with you. I did notice that while I was watching this film, and I had this moment where I was like, it was the 1830s. I was like, aren't we supposed to be more Victorian at this point?
The other thing is the book takes place in 1840, so they moved it
Mhm.
back to 1830, I assume because Keeley Hawes is younger
Mhm.
than,
Yeah.
she wanted to play this part, understandably.
And I will give my least favorite generally, and it is not the fault of the actress, to that moment Dinah fell down the stairs. Not a great moment, not a great plot device. And also, just generally, Dinah was a weird character. Again, I enjoyed the performance of the actress. She was very good. And I liked the idea that Isabella had like a close sister like connection, even if she didn't have a close connection with her sisters. But Dinah was just kind of like, again, giving a lot of Samwise Gamgee, like I would die for my boss
Mm,
energy,
mhm.
which was not totally explained and translated oddly.
Yeah, but it was, like, so high tension in a way that is so similar to The Cobb in a story
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
otherwise not high tension. I mean, not high, like, physical tension.
Yep.
And it was honestly just unhinged enough for me to come around to
Kind of
it
vibe.
like I did with the octopus in Persuasion
Yeah.
2022.
Oh God.
Oh
But
boy,
I
yeah.
understand why it's your least favorite, for sure. Should we talk about our most favorite parts?
Yes, we should. We've talked a lot about Patsy Farron here, but who we haven't talked enough about, I think, in my opinion, is Keely Hawes, who plays the older Cassandra.
Mm.
Her performance is subtle and beautiful and warm, and I wanted to be best friends with this middle aged woman who was out there determined to take care of her sister's legacy at all costs. Just like a truly astonishing lead performance in a very difficult role because a lot of what she does is just read letters.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I was gonna give it to all the acting.
Mhm.
Just the casting director. Let's give it to the casting director.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, the cinematography was beautiful. The lighting was beautiful.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yep.
I loved the acting. I'm going to call out a very specific part though, which is I think the one good thing that came out of the whole Henry Holiday situation was the scene we got after that.
Yeah.
And I think it's just both filmed really beautifully because it's in a closed space and it's evocative a little bit of the 1995 BBC Colin Firth, Jennifer Ely Pride and Prejudice, where Lizzie's sitting in a carriage coming home after rejecting Darcy at Lady Catherine's. And she's in this carriage, and it's like this again closed and confined space, but it's the scene where the two sisters are sitting in this carriage, and at this point, both of them have gone through proposal rejections. Sorry, it's not after the Henry Hobday situation, it's after the Big Wither proposal, after she rejects Harris. And they're both sitting next to each other. And there's so much unsaid in that moment, but it's still said with just the silence. And the space is really confined, and they're in this carriage and they're just together. And then you're like, this is how these sisters are and will always be. It's just going to be the two of them against the world. And no matter how many opportunities they're going to get, to be separated from each other, quote unquote, they're not going to take it. And they're just going to be together. And that, I think the way that it was framed and filmed and just the amount that these actors' faces did without saying a single word was so, so beautiful. And I also thought it was really funny that it was immediately followed by them getting home and seeing that Mary and James were visiting, and they were
Yeah.
like, WTF, why are they here again? We thought we
Yes.
were rid of them.
Yeah.
I thought it was really cute.
Yeah. I wanna change my favorite part because it's the moment when Isabella and Mr. Litterdale run to each other and kiss.
Yes.
That was a really lovely moment, and I agree with you,
Yeah.
Molly. I found myself more invested in that romance than I think I usually am with things I see on screen, and maybe it is because it was so subtle,
Yeah.
right? It was
Yeah.
really just their faces and then Cassandra piecing it together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it was a testament, I also think, to those two actors. I think Alfie
Yeah.
Enoch is
Yeah.
He's so gorgeous. Oh.
Beautiful.
stunning.
And so is she.
Yes.
They're both so beautiful. She's married to Jon Snow in real life, Kit Harington.
Yes.
That's they were spoiler alerts for Game of Thrones. They played lovers on Game of Thrones, and then they got
Ooh.
married after playing lovers on Game of Thrones.
Wow.
So
Cute.
very lovely. But what I was gonna say is Alfie Enoch in particular, like he's not just pretty, he's puppy dog pretty. He's got that
Mhm.
like
Yes.
really endearing dimples, big brown eyes thing going on, which makes you just root for him. And then Rose Leslie just like is so charismatic as an actor that you do root for her as well. So I think like the two performances and the chemistry between the two took what was on paper, I think kind of potentially a subdued love story with that unhinged moment where she turns him away while her aunt is, and this is true, dying of diphtheria. Um, and it makes the story come to life in a way that like you care about it a lot.
Mhm.
And last but not least, who wins this show?
The legacy of Cassandra Austen wins this show for me. Her sister gets a lot of shine. It was really wonderful. I had not contemplated the inner life of Cassandra Austen before watching this, and I am riveted by what her life was in this fictional imagination.
Yeah, I think mine is similar. I know it's theoretically just about technically about Cassandra's life, but I think on a meta level, this idea of having support and community to create good art is something that really wins because what Cassandra gives Jane is the reason we have Jane's books. And I think it does such a good job of at least like I think it could have gone deeper into this, but at least it raises the idea that Jane Austen's work didn't happen in a vacuum, and we didn't get these beautiful stories because of just one individual. And it took like the support of someone who loves her deeply and who believes in her work to push it out the door and get it out to the world. And I think it's so important for artists to see this and feel this and for other people to understand why it's important to support art and artists because like we face rejection most of our lives unless I guess you come from like a really privileged family and I guess you're like a nepo baby, but I don't know, maybe nepo babies face a little rejection too.
People still dislike their work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people still just like that. I think artists face rejection most of their life, and so the importance of having cheerleaders and supporters and people who love your work is so important in our ability to continue to make art. And I think that's this show, that is what won, like supporting art, supporting artists and believing in someone is, I think, so important, and that's, I think, what won in the show.
I totally agree. And also, that's a nice segue to mention that we have a Kickstarter campaign going
Yes,
to
you
raise
do.
funds for our film adaptation of Many Down.
Tell us about your Kickstarter because I'm not gonna be able to top that for who wins. I'm gonna give that the win. So tell us about your Kickstarter.
Yeah, we're running a Kickstarter campaign to fund Many Down, which is a short film about the night that Jane Austen was engaged very briefly. If you want to see a different interpretation of what could have happened that night from what you just saw in Miss Austen, please support our work. Not only is it's about the engagement, but really it's about the relationship that Jane and Cassandra share and the sounding board that Cassandra offered to Jane when she was making this very important decision. It's funny because Austen is funny and we wanted to bring that humor, but it's also a sister story. And it's also fundamentally about the choices that artists are faced with making, no matter what generation of artists they're in, which is, do I do something that is financially secure or do I follow my heart and passion and potentially set myself up for a life of financial insecurity? And how do I balance those two? That's what the movie's about. And we have a Kickstarter that's live right now. It's live until August 15th. Please go and support us. Kickstarter's all or nothing. So if we don't hit our goal, we don't get any of the money. So any little bit that you pledge counts and helps us make this film. We have a lot of different reward tiers from $10 to $1,000. So whatever you can give us will make a difference. But you can also pledge without getting a reward if you don't want to pledge any of the amounts we've given. And there's some fun rewards in there as well. So take a look at it. Sure, you'll link the Kickstarter in the show notes
Yes,
and the socials.
absolutely.
And yeah, we have some fun casting announcements coming up because we're in the middle of casting as we're recording this podcast episode. And I'm so, so excited about bringing Rose's beautiful story to the screen. And the last thing I'll add, since Rose mentioned the Austens, so the Austens is a full length play she's writing that is almost like a sequel to the events that take place in Many Down, because we know that she rejected this proposal. Sold her first novel not long after, but then the novel never went anywhere. The publisher never published it. And so in the Austens, we see Jane older, quote unquote, in her 30s, unpublished, and has sort of given up on writing and given up on her creative pursuits and is all sad and melancholy, but still, witty and funny. And it's the journey that she takes to fall back in love with her writing and embrace her writing and actually get her first book out. So it leads up to the publication of Sense and Sensibility. I think it's a beautiful story. I think it's worthy of being a feature film. And so we're making Many Down, the short film, as a proof of concept slash prequel to what would eventually be the feature film that actually tracks how Jane Austen finally got published. And we hope that if you can help us fund this short and the short does well, we attract someone with a lot of money or a production company that will give us the money to make the feature film that we're working on.
That's right. Lovely.
I'm like foaming at the mouth. I'm so
Yeah,
excited.
I am like beyond sold on this. I am sure our listeners will agree 100%, but you guys have made it so clear that you guys are the type of people who really should be making Jane Austen content because of the love and
Oh,
the dedication to her work in her life. And, I am really excited to see how you guys bring her story to life. On the socials, do you want to tell people where they can find you?
I'm on Prerna.Ramachandra on Instagram. which is our main social, but we have a Substack for Many Down that you can
Hmm.
subscribe to get all the latest info on what's happening with the film.
And also the Instagram account for the Holy Theater, the theater company that I founded in 2022, is where we're doing a lot of we're actually I guess it'll still be running when this airs.
Mhm.
The sisters bracket. We're doing an interactive Instagram thing. I don't have the right words because
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
really my
Well,
field.
Becca and I actually we participated in
Yeah.
setting well, I set Hallie and Annie from The Parent Trap against Kit and Dottie from A League of Their Own, and Becca set Lilo and Nani against Elsa
Elsa
and
and Anna,
Anna.
and Lilo and
Hmm.
Nani ran away with it.
They sure did.
And now Lilo and Nani and Hallie and Annie are going up against each other in the matchup
Oh.
this week.
Oh,
And so, yes, if you love sisters as much as we do, then follow the Holy Theater Instagram. It's the Holy Theater, and that's theater with an R-E.
Incredible.
Rose and Prerna, thank you so much for your dedication to Jane Austen's work and life. And thank you so much for joining us here to discuss what was a delightful television series to consume. Listeners, that concludes this episode of Pride and Prejudice. For next time, we will be reading Austenland and watching the movie version of Austenland, movie or TV. I don't really know, but we'll find out.
I think it's a movie with Jennifer Coolidge.
Oh, that's all I needed to know.
Yeah.
So we will be consuming that content for next time before we kind of wrap up, say a little goodbye to Persuasion, and end up running over to Mansfield Park, as Molly said. And that is going to be coming your way this fall. And until next time, listeners, stay proper.
And support the Many Down Kickstarter.
Yes! Support Many Down.
Thank you so much.
Thank
You're
you.
amazing. Thank you.
Pod and Prejudice is edited by Molly Burdick and audio produced by Graham Cook. Our show art is designed by Torrance Brown. Our show is transcribed by SpeechDocs Podcast Transcription. For transcripts and to learn more about our team, check out our website at podandprejudice.com. To keep up with the show, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Pod and Prejudice. If you love what you hear, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/podandprejudice to see how you can support us, or just drop us a rating and a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.